Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Praise Yahweh for another wonderful Shabbat together. We've got a couple of greetings that started before and just after worship. Nicole from Netherlands saying Shabbat Shalom, nice to be able to join us again. Mandy saying Shabbat Shalom. Ricardo, the Muachi family, and Cheryl saying Shabbat Shalom. Yahweh's promises are bountiful for his set-apart ones. And Jackie Ferguson also saying Shabbat Shalom. So I see there are a few others online. You're welcome to send a greeting if you like, either on the chat or through WhatsApp, but it's nice to be together. And today we are looking at Devarim 7 verse 25 to 11, 7 verse 12 to 11 verse 25, in a portion called Because. And so we're going to go straight into that. Jackie's going to kick us off here. Here we go.
And it shall be, because you hear these right rulings and shall guard and do them, that Yahweh your Elohim shall guard with you the covenant and the loving commitment which he swore to your fathers, and shall love you and bless you and increase you, and shall bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your land, your grain and your new wine and your oil, the increase of your cattle and the offspring of your flock, in the land of which he swore to your fathers to give you. Blessed are you above all peoples. There is not going to be a barren man or a barren woman among you or among your livestock. And Yahweh shall turn away from you all the sickness, and put on you none of the evil diseases of Mitzrayim, which you have known, but he shall put them all on those who hate you. And you shall consume all the peoples, whom Yahweh your Elohim is delivering over to you. Your eye shall not pardon them, and do not serve their mighty ones, for that is a snare to you. When you say in your heart, these nations are greater than I am unable to drive them out, do not be afraid of them. Remember well what Yahweh your Elohim did to Pharaoh and to all Mitzrayim, the great trials which your eyes saw, and the signs and wonders, the strong hand and the outstretched arm, by which Yahweh your Elohim brought you out. Yahweh your Elohim does so to all the peoples of whom you are afraid. And Yahweh your Elohim also sends the hornet among them, until those who are left, who hide themselves from you, are destroyed. Do not be afraid of them, for Yahweh your Elohim, the great and awesome El, is in your midst. And Yahweh your Elohim shall drive out those nations before you little by little. You are not allowed to destroy them all at once, lest the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. But Yahweh your Elohim shall deliver them over to you, and destroy them with a great destruction until they are consumed. And you shall give their sovereigns into your hand, and you shall destroy their name from under the heavens. No one is going to be able to stand against you until you have destroyed them. The carved images of their mighty ones you are to burn with fire. Do not covet the silver or gold that is on them, nor take it for yourselves, lest you be snared by it, for it is an abomination to Yahweh your Elohim. And do not bring an abomination into your house, lest you be accursed like it. Utterly loathe it and utterly hate it, for it is accursed.
Okay, so this week's Torah portion, as I mentioned, is called Because, which is the Hebrew word Eqeď. And the meaning of this word Eqeď means consequence of, or as a consequence of, and it's often also understood and translated as reward. Now, what this Torah portion is teaching for us, in effect, is that what are the consequences or the rewards for hearing and doing the commands of Yahweh? And so because you hear and do, guard and do these right rulings, these commands, Yahweh will guard you with his covenant and loving commitment. Now that's a wonderful promise to see being given to us here. Covenant relationship is based on conditional clauses within the covenant relationship. And Yahweh is making it clear here the resulting consequences of us being obedient to a covenant that he's caused us to enter in with him. And so the Hebrew word Eqeď, as I said, is also translated as reward. And that's in Tehillah 19, where it says, also your servant is warned by them. In guarding them, there is great reward. And what the psalmist is saying here, he's saying he's not only warned by the right rulings of Yahweh, because we must take heed of what his right rulings are giving to us so that we guard ourselves. But he also acknowledges that guarding them, there's actually a great reward in doing so. And so we're able to see the clear truth that because you guard the commands, there is a reward. And that reward is that Yahweh guards you with his covenant. And that is something to be reminded of on a consistent basis, on a continual basis. And so this word Eqeď is actually a marker of a cause or a reason for an event. And it actually speaks about the benefit that's given to another based on one's merit of proper behavior or being trustworthy in what you've been entrusted to do. And so what we understand is that in paying attention, which is to be having ears to hear what the Spirit is saying, listen carefully to what the word is being spoken to us and hear God and do that. And in doing so, there's a great promise, there's a great reward. Now, Eqeď is actually from the verb akav, which means to follow at the heel or to circumvent. And the root verb this is the root verb of another word that's akev, which means heel or hind part or foot. Now, what we see here, we understand from a Hebraic scriptural perspective, is that the blessing of Yahweh in the promise of guarding, doing, and being a people that are guarding his word and him loving us, we see that what will follow quickly after our heel in our paying attention to his word is the reward or the blessing for paying attention to that word. Now, a derivative of Eqeď is one we should all know very well, and that is the name of Yaakov, which means heel or heel catcher or supplanter. We know the story of Yaakov and Esau and how he grabbed the heel, etc. So already we see from the womb, this guy was hard after the heel of the promises and rewards of covenant relationship, And so another thing I just want to touch on, and I did expand a bit on it this week, and just for good purposes, especially in these last days where there are many people seeking those that will tickle the ear and not necessarily exercising proper discernment in the word, and can often be swayed by those ear ticklers that are twisting the word. And so there was an ancient saying. Now, just because there were ancient sayings, I want to use this as a base to expand on something from a scriptural perspective and the instructions that our master gives, so that we're not caught on guard by a lot of ancient practices that can lead you astray. Now, there was an ancient saying that stated that a student would follow their teacher so closely by drinking his words and would be covered by the dust of his feet. So it was customary in the ancient times, for taught ones or disciples or students to travel the dusty roads with their teacher, their master, and learning what their master taught, and be found to walking the way their master walked, which that principle is still understood in Yochanan saying that we who claim to live in him must walk even as he walked. So we too, as students, as disciples, as taught ones of the master, we must walk as he walked. So that concept is not corrupt. The idea behind that is fine. But what we see in ancient times, they would call their master or their teacher Rabbi, or more English phrase like to hear rabbi. But the Rabbi is the Hebrew word. But now the Rabbi or the master would walk through the town with his taught ones, following very close after him. And they would be actually so close to him that a traditional saying was developed among a very religious community that would say, may you be covered with the dust of your rabbi or rabbi. And so may you be walking so close to him that he's all over you. So that was the kind of idea or mindset. And we can take that mindset to understand how we are to walk in our master. But what we also have to realize is when our master came in the flesh, he made it very clear we only have one good shepherd, teacher, master, and rabbi. Great one, Yeshua Messiah, who we are to be following so closely as we walk in him. So the consequence of doing this, or the resulting reward of doing that, is a great joyful set-apart walk of righteousness that we are to guard with our all, being alert and awake, and not be found turning aside to the truth in corruption, from the truth in corruption of corrupted teachings that are leading people astray. It's 1 John 2 verse 6 that says, the one who stays in him ought himself to walk even as he walked. So we cannot say, oh, he did it, so we don't have to do it. We must walk as he walked, and he walked in complete obedience to the commands. So we see here, I want to just touch on this traditional term, ancient term, rabbi, that was commonly used by many. And I'd like to highlight what this word means for us as we look at this word in Scripture. Now, the reason I'm doing this is to set straight any misconceptions that there may be in regards to this term, especially as I did highlight the example of an ancient saying that was commonly used by so many. And that's why our master gave instruction when he was here in the flesh. Now, in Judaism, we take note that Rabbi is considered to be a teacher of Torah. And the Greek word that's used in the renewed writings, Rabbi, means my master, my teacher, my great one, and it's transliterated from the Hebrew word which means my master or my great one. But the term Rabbi is actually, the Hebrew term Rabbi is actually found only in one verse in the entire Tanakh, in the Hebrew text. And it's actually in Aramaic. And that is in Daniel 2 verse 48 when it says, "Then the sovereign made Daniel great and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over all the province of Babel and the chief of the nobles over all the wise ones of Babel." Now, the phrase "made Daniel great" is written as "le Daniel Rabbi." Now, this Aramaic word Rabbi comes from the root Aramaic word reba, which means to grow great, become great, or promote. And it corresponds to the Hebrew word rava, which means to be or become much, many, great, or abundant. So I want to highlight here, this is the only text in the Aramaic writing that relates to this term Rabbi that we see, but this was not a title that Daniel was being given. We must understand context. It wasn't a designated term that was to be attributed to Daniel. It rather highlights that he was promoted and put into a very great position of authority. That's as simple as it gets. It is understood by most scholars that the Greek word rabbi is derived from the Hebrew word rav, which means many, abundance, plentiful, great, coming from the verb ravav, which means to be or become great or abound. So the Hebrew term rav, which we do see in the text, is often used in reference to someone who occupied a very high and a very respected position, and it's often translated as chief. As in Yirmiyahu 40 verse 2, it says, "The chief of the guard took Yirmiyahu and said to him, Yahweh your Elohim has spoken this evil on this place." So just using an example there where we see Rav being referring to a chief, somebody that's in a position in a sense. But when our master revealed himself to Miriam after his resurrection, and we see in Yochanan 20 verse 16 the following, it says, Yehoshua said to her, Miriam, she turned and said to him, Rabboni, which means teacher. Now this term Rabboni, the Greek word, is also of Aramaic origin, which means my master or my teacher. Now Rabboni is only used in one other verse in the renewed writings. And that's in Marcos 10 verse 51 to 52, when it says, Yehoshua responding said to him, What do you desire? What do you desire I do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabboni, that I might receive sight, or that I receive my sight, sorry. And Yehoshua said to him, Go, your belief has healed you. And immediately he saw again and followed Yehoshua on the way. So these are the two examples where we see Rabboni being used in the renewed writings. Now, while Miriam and Bartimai, who was the one that was healed here, Bartimai was the son of Timai, who was healed from being blind. Now, they certainly identified Yehoshua Messiah correctly as the great one, the good teacher. And we take note that these verses are not verses that give an acceptance of the generic term rabbi to be used by anyone other than our master. So I want to highlight this word rabbi because I do think it's important in these days. You know, as we look at this word rabbi in the renewed writings, in fact, the term rabbi is actually used 17 times in 15 verses in the renewed writings, the majority of which are a direct reference to our master, Yeshua Messiah. The other couple, we find what they're actually saying, and we can learn from that. What we see here in Matthew 26, verse 25, we see Yehuda, who from Kyrios, who betrayed the master, said, who delivered him up answering, said, Rabbi, is it I? He said to him, you have said it. That was at the meal that they had. Okay. And in Matityahu 26, verse 49, going straight up to Yeshua, he said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Both of these accounts are of Yehuda who betrayed him, but he still acknowledged who the great one was, you know. And so we also learn from this that our master warns us of many that will come and claim master, master. But he'd say, "I don't know you." And Yehuda from Kirioth is an example for us of that. This term Rabbi is used 3 times in the book of Marcos. In Marcos 9, verse 5, Kepha, responding, said to Yeshua, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here, and let us make 3 booths, only one for you, one for Moshe, and one for Eliyahu." This was at the Transfiguration that Kepha, Yochanan, and Yaakov got to experience and see a clear revelation of Yeshua Messiah. Kepha declaring who Yeshua is as the great one, my great one, Rabbi. In Marcos 11, verse 21, again, Kepha said, remembering, said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered." In both of these accounts, Kepha is correctly addressing Yeshua Messiah as the great one. Marcos 14, verse 45, it says, coming, going straight up to him, he said to him, "Rabbi, Rabbi," and kissed him. This was another account of Yehuda's betrayal, so it's Yehuda declaring who the great one is. And in Yochanan, we see Rabbi, the book of Yochanan, we see Rabbi being used 8 times. In Yochanan 1, verse 38, Yeshua turning and seeing them following said to them, "What do you seek?" And they said to him, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" Yochanan 1, verse 49, Nathanael, said to him, "Rabbi, you are the son of Elohim, you are the sovereign of Israel." That's when he realized that this is the master who said to him, "I saw you when you were sitting under the tree." Yochanan 3, verse 2, this one came to Yeshua by night and said to him, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from Elohim, for no one is able to do these signs you do if Elohim is not with him." And then here's a passage, just a couple of verses from Yochanan 3, verse 25 to 28. It says, "A dispute arose among the taught ones of Yochanan and the Yehudim about cleansing. And they came to Yochanan and said to him, 'Rabbi, he who was with you beyond the Yarden, to whom you have witnessed, see, he is immersing, and all are coming to him.' Yochanan answered and said, 'No man is able to receive any matter unless it is given to him from the heaven. You yourselves are witnesses for me that I said, I am not the Messiah, but I am sent ahead of him.'" Now, the reason I've highlighted that passage in context is they came to Yochanan and said, "Rabbi." And his response was very clear, "I'm not the Messiah." Yochanan 4, verse 31, it says, "But in the meantime, his taught ones were asking him, saying, 'Rabbi, eat.'" Yochanan 6 says, "And having found them on the other side of the sea, they asked him, 'Rabbi, when did you come here?'" That was after he sent his taught ones on the water and he stayed, and then he met them in a boat and got to the other side. And everyone that saw him not going in the boat said, "When did you come here?" Yochanan 9, verse 2, his taught ones asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind?" And then in Yochanan 11, verse 8, it said, the taught one said to him, "Rabbi, the Yehudim were but now seeking to stone you, and are you going back there?" So I've just listed very briefly and quickly 14 of the 17 occurrences where we see Rabbi being used, and we'll look at the other 3 in a moment. But I just want to remind people of something, remind you all, we're all people here. In Rabbinic Judaism, the term Rabbi and Rabboni are terms that are used for someone who occupies a very high and respected position and authority over people. And this concept has actually been adopted as an acceptable customary title to be given to those that are teaching and leading them. These are terms that are actually promoted in the Mishnah, which was the first major rabbinic literature or oral teachings that were passed down and taught as teachings, which is something that we must stay very clear away from, very clearly far from. It's no different to the corrupted dogmas of Christianity that have asserted a corrupted man-driven authority over the interpretation of the written word of Elohim, which teachings clearly go against the Torah and the commands of our master through adding, taking away. Why? So that they can assert their authority over hearers. The term Rabbi essentially does mean my great one. And it's often confused into many people thinking that this term means my teacher. Now, here's where we see the next couple of instances where we see the term rabbi in our master giving us an instruction. And these are words we must take very careful heed to, especially in the light of the times that were happening under customs that had been developed, which he came to make aware of what we should be listening to and what we should not be listening to. The concept of one's teacher being seen by their students as their great one certainly can be understood, because you do want to be like your teacher. You know, we see pattern in scripture about listen to those leading you, etc. We know that. It's an understandable concept. But what we take note of the clear instruction of our master, our great one, he's telling us not to be called rabbi. In the following passage, the next three occurrences of rabbi is used in speaking of the Pharisees who sit in the seat of Moshe. In Matthew 23, verse 7 to 8, it says, "In greetings, and the greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Messiah, and you are all brothers." So, the full context of the use of this Greek term, Rabbi, as we see in the renewed writings, I've just made known to you. So from this, we see direct reference to Yeshua made by many, which is correct. We then see some going to Yochanan and Yochanan saying, "I'm not the Messiah." So basically saying, "Don't call me Rabbi." And then we see our master saying, the Pharisees who love to be called Rabbi, don't be called Rabbi, because you've got one who's your teacher. And when we consider the clear words of our master to not be called Rabbi, our master then goes on and says, "Call no one father," and that we should neither be called leaders. Now, some who love to be called Rabbi today try and say, anybody who's saying you shouldn't be called Rabbi, carry on reading. You see, now the master says, don't be called father, but don't you call your father and mother? They're not understanding context here. It's about authority and position that our master is speaking in parables to the crowds, but making very clear what you should be called and what you shouldn't be called. Matthew 23, verse 9 to 11, it says, "Do not call anyone on your earth father, for one is your Father who is in the heavens. Neither be called leaders, for one is your leader, the Messiah, but the greatest among you shall be your servant." You see, those who are putting themselves, like ancient times, in the position of being called Rabbi are not actually serving. They're the ones who are wanting to be served, and that's what our master was highlighting. And the Greek word that's translated as leader and also as teacher, when he says, "Do not be called Rabbi, because one is your teacher," is the Greek word kathetes, which means leader or teacher. And I'm mentioning this because we need to understand what our great teacher, our master, is teaching us when we recognize that we only have one Rabbi. The Greek word kathetes is also only used 3 times, all of which are in Matthew 23 that I've just read to you. There are many people today who also claim they don't need teachers. And is that what our master is saying? No. They are, through immaturity, erroneously claiming that they don't need anybody to teach them the word by misinterpreting our master's words. In Ephesians 4, verse 11, we are clearly told that our master and Elohim appointed some to be teachers, and that word for teachers comes from the word didaskelos, which means teach or in instruction, and comes from the word which means to learn or to teach, And so we understand that he gave some as emissaries, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers. In terms of those who are appointed to lead, we're also told in Debəarim 13, verse 7, "Remember those leading you who spoke the word of Elohim to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their belief." In other words, follow them in the pattern of obedience that they are teaching you to walk in. Shaul says, "Follow me as I follow Messiah." So it wasn't Shaul's standard. Shaul was saying, I am following the mighty one. I'm appointed to give you the word, so follow my example. In Hebrews or Debəarim 13, verse 17, it says, "Obey those leading you and be subject to them, for they watch for your lives as having to give an account. Let them do so with joy and not groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you." And in verse 24 of chapter 13 of Hebrews, it says, "Greet all those leading you, and all the set-apart ones, those from Italy, greet you." Closing off the letter. So all of these words that are translated as leading come from the Greek word hegomai or hegeomai, and it means to lead, to rule, to govern, to count, consider, and it's understood by meaning to lead or go first, and therefore pictures one who leads by example. Once again, the reason I am expanding on all these Greek words is to highlight that our Master did appoint some to lead and to teach his body and train them to maturity. Our Master was not saying that you do not need to be led or to be taught by anyone that he has appointed, which many claim today, as they refuse to submit to the appointed order of our Master and follow his pattern and design for set-apartness, because they prefer to do whatever's right in their own eyes. So what is our Master telling us? He's making it clear, do not put anybody on a pedestal and call them your great one, Rabbi, as it's the one who serves that will be the greatest among us. The head of the body is Yeshua Messiah, and we are his body. He's appointed some to teach and to lead and equip others to maturity, to go and make taught ones. So we all have responsibility and roles within the body. The Pharisees of the day put themselves in such high positions of authority over others, and Messiah made it very clear. They loved to make their tzitzits very long. They wanted to be in the best places at the feasts. They wanted to be in the best seats in the congregations, and they loved to be greeted in the marketplaces and loved to be called Rabbi, Rabbi. So they feed off people calling them Rabbi. Those who position themselves like this are actually, according to our Master's standard, not appointed true teachers and leaders of the Torah. Yet we sadly see today that there are so many people who are following such people, while they are simply refusing to remember, obey, and greet those leading them in the word of Elohim. In terms of walking in the dust of the Rabbi, I want to make it clear that this customary adopted phrase should cause us to think that we have one Rabbi and we should be walking so close to him, that his walk is reflected in our lives. And so therefore we must recognize that there are some who are appointed to teach and lead, whom the body is called to consider the outcome of the way of their life and imitate their belief and follow them. But we have one head, Yeshua Messiah. We have one Rabbi. He is the head. And the reason I'm highlighting this in terms of just beginning this Torah portion, which is called because there's consequences for what one does in everything, the choices one makes. And so there are false claims that there are no teachers necessary, which we know is not true. And we also need to understand that we must never put anybody into a position and elevate them to the point of being called Rabbi. There are ministries today who claim to be and have promoted themselves, who may claim to be and promote themselves as being Torah-observant ministries today, being led by those who have called themselves by the title of Rabbi, or they've been designated that term either by a group or a board that has seemingly the authority to do so, which is clearly going against our Master's command, and this is very dangerous. It's a serious warning that needs to be heard today. We are not to be submitting to anyone who's labeling themselves or being called Rabbi. It's as simple as it gets. We should rather be seeking the Master to show us those that he has appointed to equip the body and who clearly adhere to the scriptural characteristics and qualities for such appointment and calling. So I hope that this just brief insight into the concept of calling somebody Rabbi brings some clarity and understanding of how serious we are to take our Master's words. And it's interesting that those who love to be called Rabbi will come up with counterfeit presentations of saying people lack knowledge in Scripture and are immature and don't understand, I've given you every instance where the words are used. You can make up your own mind. But it's very clear in its presentation of who our rabbi is. And it's no other man but our Master, Yeshua Messiah. Amen? So don't seek to be called Rabbi and don't call anybody Rabbi except Yeshua Messiah. He is the one, as Miriam and Bartimaeus and Kepha and Yochanan and even Yehuda understood. So let's get back to because. When we think of this word because, we realize how important this little word is. We sang the song today because of Yahweh. And we understand that it signifies for us a word that preempts the resulting consequences of one's actions, be it good or bad. And this word Eqeď is actually used 15 times in the Tanakh, and we consider that these are verses that highlight for us clear witness of what's the resulting action of one's choices. The first time we see Eqeď being used is in reference to Abraham in Bereshit 22 verse 18, when it says, "And in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed because you have obeyed my voice." How awesome is this? Because Abraham obeyed the voice of Yahweh, did not withhold his son Yitzchak, Yahweh said, "I'm going to bless all the nations because of you." You know, the genealogy of Messiah begins with Abraham because it's all about covenant. And you're going to hear me say a lot of because today. This is the portion of because. You know, Yahweh made an everlasting covenant with Abraham, all because he obeyed Yahweh. It's confirmed to us in Bereshit 26, verse 4 to 5, when Yahweh speaks to Yitzchak about confirming that the increase of his seed will be like the stars of the heavens because Abraham obeyed my voice. Because Abraham obeyed the voice of Yahweh, guarded his charge, guarded his commands, his laws, and the Torah, plural of Torah, the promise of Yahweh was confirmed to his son, confirming the prophetic promise and assurance of Messiah who would be born in the flesh of man as a son in order to redeem people back to covenant and give the consequence of because you hear his voice, the reassurance that Yahweh would bless us. So because of Abraham's obedience, Yahweh chose this man's lineage to come forth as a man, the second Adam, the son of Adam. How awesome is that? And I'm highlighting this to highlight a clear truth that because we walk in the commands and obey his word, there's a reward for that. In Bamidbar 14, verse 24, it says, "But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me completely, I shall bring into the land where he went, and his seed shall inherit it." Caleb is a great example for us. We know Yehoshua and Caleb were the only two positive spies that got to enter into the promised land because they had a different spirit in them. They didn't have an anti-Messiah spirit. They had a spirit of obedience, listening to, guarding, and obeying the command, the charge, and the laws, and the right rulings, and the Torah of our Master. And the result of continually obeying the voice of Yahweh, after having been delivered from Mitzrayim and having seen the esteem of Yahweh, the entire nation of fighting men were actually sentenced to death. And they wouldn't enter the promised land except Yehoshua and Caleb because they refused to listen and they rebelled. So here we see the reward on either side, consequences for actions and choices. In Deďarim 7 verse 12 that we read today, when it starts this Torah portion, "Because you hear these right rulings and shall guard and do them, Yahweh shall guard you with the covenant and loving commitment which he swore to your fathers." This is words we need to be reminded of, which we are today because we're hearing them, and reaffirmed in us as a covenant people, that now there's a clear conditional clause that we must continually uphold. Because we guard it, we have the assurance that we'll be kept safe. That is the bottom line. And the next time we see this word being used is in the next chapter we're going to read, where it says, "Like the nations which Yahweh is destroying before you, so you are to perish because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim." So here we see this kind of clear, because you obey, because you don't obey. And what are the consequences for that? What we see here in Tehillah 19 verse 11, another great example. It says, "Your servant is warned by them. In guarding them, there is great reward." And here Eqeď is translated as reward again. The resulting action of obeying. Tehillah 19 also celebrates the perfection of the Torah of Yahweh, bringing back the being. You know, in Shemuel Bet, we are told also he has to pay fourfold for the lamb because he did this deed and because he had no compassion. Now, these were the words that David was speaking to Nathan when confronted by Nathan. When Nathan confronted the king, when David obviously took Bathsheba, and Nathan confronted him and he gave this parable story, and David said, "This is what must be done. He must be repaying fourfold." And when it was made known, "But this is you," David says, we see Nathan speaking to David in the same chapter in verse 10. It says, "Now the sword does not turn aside from your house because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife." Now we must understand, Yahweh made it very clear here to David, because he despised Yahweh, the sword would not turn aside from his house. David was told how his wives would be taken from him and that evil from his own house would rise up and his wives would be lain with that which would rise up before him. Now that happened. Avshalom, the wicked son of David, did this. You can read about that in Shemuel Aleph 16, where Ahithophel pitched a tent for Avshalom on the top of David's house, and he went into all of David's concubines. I mean, this is a resulting action that Yahweh spoke through the prophet Nathan to David because he despised Yahweh. This is a very clear warning. We're looking at the consequences of this Torah portion highlighting for us because today. And because you obey his voice, we can be protected. But there with that, we also see that we should never lose our ability to think, okay, I'm fine now, I can do what I like. Because if you despise Yahweh's word, his sword will not depart from your house. You know, Israel despised Yahweh. He asks this question in Malachi, if I am the father, where's my esteem? If I am Elohim, if I'm the father, where's my esteem? If I am a master, where's my fear? And he says, you have despised my name. And they asked him, how have we despised? He says, because you've called the table of Yahweh despicable. You see, when you don't follow Yahweh's pattern, you despise his name. When you despise his name, there's a consequence and a reward for that. That's not a good reward. So we need to understand, guarding his commands, there is great reward. And in Tehillah 40 verse 15, it says, let those who say to me, aha, aha, be appalled at their own shame. Now, at their own is actually also translated from Eqeď, because what we're seeing here, David is saying that those who disregard his word should have the resulting action of being appalled because of their shame. He repeats this in Tehillah 70 verse 3 when he says, let those who say, aha, aha, be turned back because of their shame. So it highlights again this idea, what we learn from this, that many who falsely say wicked things about us, mock us, speak of us as evildoers, simply for being obedient to the word, we know that their words will be turned back on them in the day of Yahweh, when they will stand ashamed in the day of Yahweh. And Kepha reminds us as sojourners and pilgrims to abstain from fleshly lusts which battle against the being, having our behavior among the nations good, so that when they speak against us as evildoers, let them, by observing our good works, esteem Elohim in a day of visitation. Tehillah 119, which celebrates the Torah, in verse 33, it says, teach me, O Yahweh, your laws, the way of your laws, and I observe it to the end. And in verse 112, it says, I have inclined my heart to do your laws forever, to the end. Both of these passages, Eqeď is the root word that's translated as to the end, which highlights a clear witness for us about teaching us this valuable lesson on because and the consequences thereof. Therefore, we must never take our stand outside of obedience. Mishle 22 verse 4, Eqeď is translated as reward, where it says the reward of humility is the fear of Yahweh, riches and esteem and life. So I've just highlighted a few verses in Scripture which give us a wonderful picture of who we are to be in our Master, guarding his commands with the assurance of what we know the resulting benefits and rewards will be. But at the same time, we also are told what is the reward for disobeying, or what are the consequences for disobeying. Maybe you don't like hearing the word reward when it's a negative thing, you know. And in Yeshayahu 5 verse 23, Eqeď is translated as for, when it says, who declare right the wrong for a bribe, and the righteousness of the righteous they turn aside from him. What we see here is the twisted theologies and dogmas of man that declare righteous as wrongdoers because of the reward they get from those who manipulate and control through their dogmas and corrupt traditions. The last time in the Hebrew text that we see Eqeď being used is in Amos 4 verse 12 says, I'm doing this to you, O Israel, and because I do this to you, prepare to meet your Elohim, O Israel. These weren't encouraging words. These were words of warning. Judgment against a corrupt Israel had been decreed. It could no longer be avoided through repentance because they refused to repent. And so they were going to be exiled for their lustful living and their hypocritical worship, and in their continued need to neglect the discipline of our Master through famine, sword, plague, defeat in war, devastating destruction. He tells Israel that because he does this, they had better be prepared to meet their Maker. Did you want to share something? The reward or resulting action of continued stubbornness and being stiff-necked in rebellion against the word to those who continue to be lawless will meet him face to face. We saw it in this Torah portion. Last week's Torah portion ended with how Yahweh repays him to his face, those that rebel against him. So when we look at this portion, we realize that this very small word that this portion is called is actually a very big word for us indeed. Not only will Yahweh guard us with the covenant and loving commitment that he swore to our fathers because we obey him, but he will love us, he will bless us, and he'll increase us. How awesome is that? The greatest expression of our love for Yahweh is to obey his word. We know that. We've spoken many times about that. Mishle 8 verse 17 says, I love those who love me, and those who earnestly seek me do find me. This is obviously a personification of wisdom at its core that we are to be seeking. And we also take note that we need to be a people that are walking in the love of Yahweh, guarding his commands, because then we understand that he will increase us. The Hebrew word for increase is rava, which means to become great. In other words, our great one will make us become great and abundant and flourish, bearing much fruit that lasts. And in that, he abundantly blesses us, shows us the joy of being in a relationship with him. You know, this is the blessing of obedience. Our master's complete shalom that he gives us. To be blessed above all peoples because we receive the kingdom rules of our coming king. That is something that we must often just stop and remind ourselves of. We read, I think it was last week, what great nation or the week before has these great laws, these rules that we have, that marks us as a unique, treasured possession. To realize that the kingdom of Yeshua Messiah is what we are to be proclaiming right now, we must go further than just simply hearing about the kingdom, because his instructions for that kingdom living must be lived out in us right now. So many people claim to be in Yeshua Messiah, not following his kingdom principles, not following his word. And here we see in Yochanan 14, it says, if anyone loves me, he shall guard my commands, and my Father shall love him, and we shall come to him and make our stay with him. He who does not love me does not guard my words, and the word which you hear is not mine, but of the Father who sent me. We need to be a people who are guarding the commands, because one of the promises and part of the rewards of guarding his commands, in this Torah portion we see, Yahweh says, I will not send on you the diseases of Mitzrayim. Simply because, why? When we obey his dietary laws, sexual laws, cleansing laws, no drinking of blood, etc., he won't send the diseases of Mitzrayim upon us. When we refrain from what we must not do, is that right when I'm saying that? When we don't do what we shouldn't do, that's a good thing. We have the assurance of being protected from the diseases of Mitzrayim. And then we need to make sure, there are times where people get sick. And in Yochanan 9, Yeshua answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of Elohim might be manifested in him. But we also know when we look at the plagues and the sicknesses that Yahweh sent as discipline and destruction in Mitzrayim, he does not send that upon a people that are guarding covenant. We're also given a very clear warning in this chapter. It says here, you shall consume all the peoples whom Yahweh your Elohim is delivering over to you. In other words, when he delivers over to you, he means that you must put it under the ban. It must not have an effect in your life. It mustn't have authority over you. You must make sure it has no effect in your life. And in doing that, he says,